Opening, May 2018. The sledgehammer struck concrete at 9:47 a.m., sending a cloud of dust spiraling through the abandoned gymnasium. Construction foreman Miguel Santos wiped sweat from his brow, squinting through the haze at what his crew had just uncovered. It was May 2018, and the demolition of Lincoln Elementary's old gym in Sacramento, California, was supposed to be routine. Just another building coming down to make way for a new STEM center. But nothing about what happened next was routine. "Hold up!" Miguel's voice cut through the roar of machinery. "Kill the equipment, now!" The jackhammers fell silent. In the sudden quiet, the only sound was the creaking of old rafters and the nervous breathing of the construction crew gathering around the hole they'd just torn into the floor. Beneath decades of poured concrete, something had been hidden. Something that shouldn't be there. A tangle of faded fabric, the curve of what looked like bone, and a rusted metal nameplate that read, "V. Harris, 3rd grade teacher." "Jesus Christ," whispered one of the workers. That's a person." Miguel pulled out his phone with trembling hands. "Sacramento police? This is the Lincoln Elementary demolition site on Folsom Boulevard. You need to get here right now. We just found human remains under the gymnasium floor." Within 40 minutes, yellow crime scene tape surrounded the entire building. Detective Sarah Chen of the Sacramento Cold Case Unit stood at the edge of the excavation pit, her flashlight beam cutting through the dust. At 41, Chen had spent 15 years in homicide, but this case felt different. Personal, somehow. Maybe because she'd grown up not far from here, or maybe because the victim had been a teacher, someone who'd dedicated her life to protecting children, just like Chen had dedicated hers to protecting the innocent. Chen's own mother had been a domestic violence survivor. She knew what it meant to live in fear, to rebuild a life from ashes. That's why she'd joined the force. That's why cold cases kept her up at night. "Female, approximately 5'6", called out Dr. Raymond Torres, the medical examiner, his voice echoing in the hollow space. "Based on the bone density and pelvic structure, I'd estimate age at death between 30 and 40. She's been here a long time." "How long?" Chen asked, already dreading the answer. Torres examined the fragments of clothing. "This fabric, polyester blend, style consistent with early 1980s. And look at this." He held up a small, corroded object. "Casio digital watch, model F91W. These became popular around 1982, 1983. Chen's mind was already racing. Lincoln Elementary had been operating since the 1870s, hundreds of teachers, thousands of students. But something about that nameplate nagged at her. She pulled out her phone and called the district office. "This is Detective Chen, Sacramento PD. I need you to pull personnel records for a teacher named V. Harris, who worked at Lincoln Elementary in the early 1980s. The response came back in less than 10 minutes. When Chen heard the name, her blood ran cold. "Victoria Harris," the district clerk said. "Employed from 1977 to 1983. 3rd grade teacher. She was reported missing on Sunday, October 23, 1983. Case was never solved." Chen hung up and stared at the excavation site. 35 years. Victoria Harris had been buried beneath the school where she taught, underneath the gymnasium floor where hundreds of children had played basketball and run relay races, completely unaware they were running over her grave. "Pull everything," Chen ordered, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. "I want every file, every witness statement, every piece of evidence from 1983. This woman didn't bury herself, and whoever did this has been walking free for 35 years. Not anymore." Before we continue this shocking story, please take a second to subscribe and like this video. Your support helps bring forgotten cases back into the light and ensures you don't miss any stories in the future. Part 1. The perfect Sunday, October 23rd, 1983. Sacramento, California. The morning started like any other Sunday in the Land Park neighborhood. The Sacramento Bee newspapers lay on doorsteps, headlines proclaiming the Dodgers' victory in the National League Championship. Reagan was president, the economy was recovering, and the temperature was a perfect 72 degrees under cloudless California skies. At 1247 Riverside Drive, Victoria Harris stood in her kitchen, packing her leather satchel with lesson plans for Monday morning. At 32 years old, she was entering her 6th year at Lincoln Elementary, beloved by students and respected by colleagues. Her dark, curly hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she wore casual weekend clothes, jeans, a burgundy cardigan, and her favorite pair of white Keds sneakers. "You're going in on a Sunday again?" Her husband, James Harris, looked up from the Sacramento Kings game playing on their wood-paneled television. At 38, James was the principal of Lincoln Elementary, Victoria's boss, technically, though they'd been careful to keep their professional and personal lives separate since their marriage 5 years earlier. "Just for an hour," Victoria said, kissing his cheek. "I need to set up the learning centers for the weather unit. The kids are doing cloud identification tomorrow, and I want to hang the charts before Monday morning rush." James nodded absently, his attention already back on the game. "Okay, I'll have dinner ready when you get back. Spaghetti?" "Perfect." Victoria grabbed her keys, a distinctive keychain with a small brass apple that read "World's Best Teacher," and headed for the door. "Love you." "Love you too." Those were the last words James Harris would ever speak to his wife. Victoria's car, a light blue 1979 Honda Accord, pulled into the Lincoln Elementary parking lot at 2:28 p.m. The school sat quiet and empty, as it did every Sunday. The only other vehicle in the lot was a white maintenance van belonging to Frank Morrison, the weekend security guard who doubled as the building's custodian. Frank was in the staff lounge, eating a sandwich and half watching a portable TV, when he heard Victoria's car pull up. He glanced at the clock, 2:30 p.m., and made a mental note. Later, this detail would become crucial. Through the lounge window, Frank watched Victoria walk across the parking lot, satchel over her shoulder, heading toward the main entrance. She waved when she saw him through the window. He waved back. She used her key to enter through the front doors. Frank heard them click shut behind her. That was the last time anyone saw Victoria Harris alive. At 2:45 p.m., Frank decided to make his rounds. Lincoln Elementary was a sprawling, single-story building built in the 1960s with long corridors connecting various wings, classrooms, offices, library, cafeteria, and the old gymnasium at the far east end of the campus. The gym was scheduled for renovation. It had been closed to students since June, when inspectors found asbestos in the ceiling tiles. Frank walked through the main hallway, checking doors. Everything seemed normal. He noticed that the light was on in room 12, Victoria's classroom, and could see the silhouette of someone moving inside, hanging something on the walls. He didn't think anything of it. At 4:15 p.m., Frank completed his rounds and returned to the lounge. Victoria's car was still in the parking lot. He figured she was taking her time, maybe grading papers. Teachers often lost track of time when they got absorbed in their work. At 5:30 p.m., as the sun began to set, Frank noticed the car was still there. He walked down to room 12. The classroom was empty. The lights were off. On the walls, construction paper clouds hung on strings, cumulus, stratus, cirrus, swaying gently in the breeze from the open window. But Victoria was gone. Frank checked the bathrooms, the library, the office. He even knocked on doors and called her name, his voice echoing through empty hallways. Nothing. At 5:47 p.m., Frank called James Harris. Mr. Harris, it's Frank Morrison at the school. Sorry to bother you, sir, but is Mrs. Harris home yet? There was a pause. No, she left here around 2:15. She should have been back hours ago. Why? Well, sir, her car's still in the parking lot, but I can't find her anywhere in the building. Another pause, longer this time. When James spoke again, his voice was tight. I'm on my way. James Harris arrived at Lincoln Elementary at 6:03 p.m., his own car screeching into the parking lot. Frank met him at the entrance, and together they searched every room, every closet, every corner of the school. James called Victoria's name over and over, his voice growing more desperate with each empty classroom. Victoria's purse was on her desk in room 12. Her car keys, still with that brass Apple keychain, lay next to a stack of ungraded math worksheets. Her satchel sat in the corner, lesson plans neatly organized inside. Everything was there except Victoria. At 6:41 p.m., James called the Sacramento Police Department. My wife is missing, he said, his voice shaking. She came to work at the school and she's just gone. Part 2. The investigation begins. Sacramento police arrived at Lincoln Elementary at 7:12 p.m., just as the last traces of daylight faded from the October sky. Detective Lieutenant Michael Reeves of the Missing Persons Unit stepped out of his unmarked sedan, notebook already in hand. At 44 years old, Reeves had seen his share of missing person cases, and he knew the first hours were critical. Who was the last person to see her? Reeves asked as he entered the building. That would be me, sir, Frank Morrison said, still shaken. I saw her come in around 2:30, waved at her through the window. She went to her classroom and I saw someone moving around in there about 45 minutes later. But when I checked at 5:30, she was gone. Reeves wrote this down. You said you saw someone moving in the classroom. Are you certain it was Mrs. Harris? Frank hesitated. Well, I saw a silhouette through the door window. The lights were on. I just assumed it was her. Who else would it be? That question hung in the air. Reeves interviewed James Harris next, in the principal's office. James sat behind his desk, hands trembling as he gripped a coffee mug. He'd turned on every light in the building, as if Victoria might materialize from the shadows. Mr. Harris, I need you to walk me through this afternoon. What time did your wife leave home? Around 2:15, maybe 2:20. She said she'd be gone about an hour. When she wasn't back by dinner time, I started to worry, but I thought maybe she'd run errands or stopped by a friend's house. Then Frank called and... His voice broke. Did you and your wife argue today? Any disagreements? James's head snapped up. No, nothing like that. We had a perfectly normal morning. She made breakfast, I watched the game. Everything was fine. What about her state of mind lately? Any stress, depression, unusual behavior? She was happy. She loved her job, loved the kids. If anything, she was more energized than usual. She'd been working on some kind of project, I think, but she never talked about work stuff with me. Professional boundaries, you know? Reeves made a note. Project? What kind of project? I don't know. She'd been making phone calls in the evenings, staying late after school sometimes. I figured it was parent conferences or curriculum planning. While Reeves interviewed James, 2 patrol officers conducted a systematic search of the school. They checked every classroom, every storage closet, the boiler room, the kitchen, even the crawl space beneath the stage in the auditorium. They found nothing. Victoria Harris had vanished from a locked building with only 3 points of entry, all of which Frank Morrison had visual access to from the staff lounge. At 9:15 p.m., crime scene unit technician Barbara Yates arrived to process Victoria's classroom. Under the harsh glare of portable lights, she photographed everything. The construction paper clouds still hanging from the ceiling, the grade book open on the desk, the purse, the keys, the satchel. "Look at this," Yates said, pointing to the classroom door. "Scratch marks around the lock. Fresh. The metal's bright underneath." Reeves crouched down to examine it. Someone had picked the lock. Recently. "But Mrs. Harris had a key," Frank pointed out. "Why would she pick her own lock?" "Maybe she didn't," Reeves said quietly. The evidence technicians dusted for fingerprints. They found dozens, expected in a classroom used by 27 third-graders. But on the doorknob, they found something unusual, a partial print that didn't match Victoria's, James's, or any of the school staff on file. At 11:30 p.m., as the search continued, a patrol officer discovered something disturbing in the gymnasium. The building was supposed to be locked, condemned due to asbestos. But when Officer David Park tried the door, it swung open. The padlock lay on the ground, bolt cutters' marks visible in the harsh beam of his flashlight. "Detective, you need to see this." Reeves, James, and Frank followed Park into the dark gym. The smell hit them first: damp concrete, old wood, and something else, something chemical. The floor near the eastern wall showed signs of recent disturbance. Fresh concrete, still slightly damp, had been poured over a section about 6 feet by 3 feet. "When was this poured?" Reeves asked. Frank shook his head. "The gym's been closed since June. No renovation work was supposed to start until November." James stared at the fresh concrete, his face pale under the flashlight beams. "Oh, God! You don't think—" "Mr. Harris, when did you last come into this gymnasium?" I don't know. Weeks ago, maybe longer. We don't use it." Reeves radioed for the K9 unit. Within 20 minutes, a German shepherd named Rex arrived with his handler. The dog went straight to the fresh concrete and sat down, alert. "He's indicating human remains," the handler said, "or someone was here very recently." Reeves made the call. "I need a search warrant and excavation equipment, now." But there was a problem. It was Sunday night, nearly midnight. No judge would issue a warrant to excavate a school floor based solely on a K9 alert and suspicious concrete. They'd need more evidence. The gymnasium was sealed and placed under guard while Reeves began building his case. It would be 3 days before they got that warrant. 3 days during which Victoria Harris's killer thought he'd gotten away with murder. Part 3. Victoria's Secret. While crime scene investigators worked through the night, Detective Reeves began digging into Victoria Harris's life. What he found surprised him. On Monday morning, Reeves visited Lincoln Elementary during school hours. The building buzzed with confused whispers. Mrs. Harris's third-grade class had been combined with the fourth grade for the day, and rumors were already spreading. He started by interviewing Victoria's closest colleague, Susan Patterson, a fifth-grade teacher who'd known Victoria for 6 years. "Victoria was the best teacher here," Susan said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "The kids adored her. So patient, so creative. She'd stay late helping struggling students, buy supplies with her own money. There was this one kid, Tommy Rodriguez. His family couldn't afford a winter coat. Victoria bought him one and told his mother it was from a school fund. There was no school fund. That was just Victoria. Mrs. Patterson, you mentioned she'd stay late. How often?" 2, 3 times a week. Sometimes she'd be here until 7 or 8. "Working on lesson plans?" Susan hesitated. "I assumed so, but now that you ask—" There were phone calls. I'd walk past her classroom and hear her on the phone, speaking very quietly. Serious conversations, not social calls, and she'd get mail here at school, personal mail, not school-related stuff. I remember because it had a P.O. box return address, not a name. Reeves's instincts tingled. Do you remember the P.O. box number? No, but wait, the mail room might have a record. All our mail goes through the office. In the school's administrative office, Reeves found what he was looking for. Victoria Harris had been receiving regular correspondence from P.O. Box 847 in Sacramento. When Reeves called the post office with a warrant, he learned the box was registered to something called Haven House. Haven House. Reeves had never heard of it, but a quick records search revealed it was a women's shelter for victims of domestic violence, operating quietly on the outskirts of Sacramento. It had opened in 1981 and was one of only 3 such facilities in the county. At 2 p.m., Reeves drove to Haven House, a nondescript single-story building behind a grocery store on Stockton Boulevard. The windows were covered with heavy curtains, and there was no sign outside. He knocked, identified himself, and waited. A woman in her 50s opened the door a crack. "What's this about?" "Ma'am, I'm investigating the disappearance of Victoria Harris. I have reason to believe she was involved with Haven House." The woman's face changed. She opened the door wider. "Come in. I'm Diane Weber. I run this place." Diane led Reeves into a small office cluttered with files and advocacy posters. "Victoria was one of our volunteers," she said quietly. "One of the best. She helped with everything: intake interviews, legal paperwork, finding housing for women who were leaving their partners. She had a gift for making frightened women feel safe." "How long had she been volunteering?" "About 18 months. She came to us in early 1982, said she wanted to help women in crisis. She never explained why in detail, but—" Diane paused. "One night, after a particularly difficult intake, this woman had been hospitalized 3 times by her husband. Victoria told me something. She said, 'I know what it's like to grow up in a house where you're afraid all the time. I can't save my mother, but maybe I can save someone else's daughter.'" Reeves felt a chill. "Her mother?" "She never elaborated, but I got the sense her father was the problem. Maybe her mother left because of abuse, I don't know. Victoria kept her personal life very private." "Did anyone know about her volunteer work? Her husband?" Diane shook her head firmly. "Victoria was adamant that James couldn't know. He was principal of the school where she taught, and she worried it would create complications. She said James was a good man, but very concerned with appearances and professional reputation. She didn't want to put him in an awkward position." Reeves pulled out his notebook. "Mrs. Weber, in the course of her volunteer work, did Victoria ever interact with dangerous people, angry husbands, threatening situations?" Diane's expression darkened. 3 weeks ago, Victoria helped a woman named Michelle Bradford leave her husband. Michelle had 2 young kids, and her husband, Greg Bradford, was a commercial real estate developer. Wealthy, connected, controlling. The kind of man who thinks his money puts him above the law. What happened? Michelle showed up here with a broken wrist and cigarette burns on her arms. She'd finally had enough. Victoria helped her create an exit plan: new identity documents, bus tickets to Oregon, cash from our emergency fund. Michelle and her children disappeared on October 1st. And Greg Bradford? He went ballistic. Showed up here 2 days later threatening legal action, saying we'd kidnapped his wife and children. I told him we don't give out information about our residents. He said, and I quote, "If I find out who helped my wife, they'll regret ever being born." Did he threaten Victoria specifically? He didn't know about Victoria. We never use volunteers' real names with clients. Victoria always went by Sarah. But Reeves knew how secrets worked in a small city. Greg Bradford had money, connections, and a reason to find out who'd helped his wife escape. Private investigators, bribes, following paper trails. A determined man with resources could discover almost anything. Reeves had his first real suspect. Part 4. The Suspects. Over the next 48 hours, Detective Reeves built a profile of Greg Bradford. What he found was disturbing. Bradford, 41, was a self-made millionaire who'd built his fortune developing shopping centers and office parks across Northern California. He presented himself as a family man and philanthropist, but behind closed doors, court records painted a different picture. Michelle Bradford had filed 3 police reports between 1979 and 1982, all later withdrawn. Neighbors reported hearing screaming. A hospital visit in 1981 showed injuries consistent with a fall downstairs, though the ER doctor had noted in the file. Patient seemed afraid, refused to make eye contact. Possible domestic situation. On October 23, 1983, the day Victoria disappeared, Greg Bradford claimed he was in Los Angeles attending a real estate conference at the Century Plaza Hotel. Reeves called the hotel. Yes, Mr. Bradford had been registered. Yes, he'd attended the opening session Saturday morning. But there was a gap. Bradford had checked out of a scheduled afternoon panel at 1 p.m. Sunday and didn't reappear until the closing dinner at 7 p.m., 6 hours. Plenty of time to drive from L.A. to Sacramento, roughly 6.5 hours in 1983 traffic, commit murder, and drive back. But Reeves needed more than suspicious timing. He needed evidence. And so far, Greg Bradford was clean. No forensic evidence linking him to the school, no witnesses placing him in Sacramento. Then Reeves got a call from his partner, Detective Linda Vasquez. "You need to hear this," Vasquez said. "I pulled Victoria Harris's phone records from her home line. Over the past 6 months, she made dozens of calls to a number in San Francisco. I traced it." "Who was she calling?" "David Cole, retired Sacramento PD detective. Moved to San Francisco 5 years ago after he put in his 30 years. Reeves froze. Why would Victoria Harris be calling a retired cop? That's what I wondered. So I called him. He wouldn't tell me much over the phone, but he admitted he knew Victoria's father." "Victoria's father?" Vasquez pulled out a file. "Robert Whitmore. He was a patrol officer with Sacramento PD from 1959 to 1977, retired early due to health reasons. Died in 1978 from cirrhosis, alcoholic. David Cole was his partner for most of those years." Something clicked in Reeves's mind. Pull Robert Whitmore's personnel file. Everything. An hour later, they were staring at a deeply troubling record. Officer Robert Whitmore had been investigated 3 times for excessive force. All incidents involved domestic disturbance calls where Whitmore had allegedly beaten the male suspect beyond what was necessary. The investigations had been quietly closed due to insufficient evidence, but the file contained something else, a divorce decree from 1968. Virginia Whitmore had filed for divorce, citing repeated physical abuse and fear for personal safety. Victoria Harris, then Victoria Whitmore, had been 10 years old at the time. "Jesus," Vasquez muttered. "Victoria's father was an abuser." "And a cop," Reeves added, "which means he knew how to work the system, how to make things disappear." They dug deeper. In 1976, a woman named Sandra Kemp had filed a restraining order against her husband, Frank Kemp, after years of documented abuse. Officer Robert Whitmore had responded to 3 domestic disturbance calls at the Kemp residence. Sandra Kemp disappeared in November 1976. Never found. Frank Kemp was questioned but never charged. Robert Whitmore had been one of the investigating officers. In 1974, another case, Barbara Chen, no relation to Sarah Chen, filed for divorce from her husband, Michael Chen, claiming abuse. Whitmore responded to 2 calls. Barbara Chen disappeared in March 1974. Never found. "He was helping them," Vasquez said quietly. Whitmore was helping abusive husbands make their wives disappear. For money, Reeves agreed. Had to be. These guys weren't friends of his. They were paying him to cover up murders. And David Cole was his partner. The implications were staggering. If Cole had been involved in Whitmore's scheme, and if Victoria had figured it out. Reeves called David Cole. "Detective Cole, this is Lieutenant Reeves, Sacramento PD. I need to know why Victoria Harris was calling you." There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, Cole spoke. "She was asking about her father, about his old cases." What did she want to know? She'd found some old paperwork in her mother's things. Her mother died last year, up in Oregon. Letters, case files Robert had brought home. Victoria thought her father had been involved in something. She wanted to know if I knew anything about missing women, unsolved cases from the 70s. What did you tell her? I told her to leave it alone, that her father was dead, and there was no point digging up the past. She wouldn't listen. "Mr. Cole, where were you on Sunday, October 23rd? Another long pause. "I was in San Francisco, at home, alone. No alibi. Did you ever visit Sacramento? Meet with Victoria in person?" "Once, September 15th. She insisted on meeting face to face. We met at a coffee shop downtown. She showed me documents, evidence she thought proved her father had helped men kill their wives. She wanted me to go to the police with her, make a statement." "And you refused?" "Damn right I refused. I told her she was chasing ghosts, that even if Robert had done something wrong, there was no proof, no bodies, no way to make a case 30 years later. I told her to let it go." "How did she react?" "She said if I wouldn't help her expose it, she'd do it herself. She said women were still dying, and if her father had protected killers, the world needed to know, even if it destroyed his memory." Reeves leaned back in his chair. "Detective Cole, I'm going to need you to come to Sacramento for an interview. Formal, on record." "Am I a suspect?" "Everyone's a suspect until I find Victoria Harris." Cole agreed to drive down the next morning. But something about the conversation bothered Reeves. Cole sounded tired, not defensive, resigned, not afraid. Was he the killer, or just a man carrying 30 years of guilt? Part 5. The Warrant. On Wednesday, October 26, 1983, Detective Reeves finally obtained his search warrant. Armed with evidence of fresh concrete, K9 alerts, and the suspicious circumstances of Victoria's disappearance, a judge authorized the excavation of the Lincoln Elementary Gymnasium floor. The work began at 8 a.m. James Harris stood outside the police barriers, his face gray. Students had been sent home for the day. News vans lined Folsom Boulevard. The concrete crew worked carefully, breaking through the surface layer by layer. At 11:47 a.m., they hit something. "Stop!" the forensic supervisor called. "We've got fabric." Dr. Torres, the medical examiner, stepped into the excavation pit. Under the glare of work lights, he carefully brushed away dirt and concrete dust from what appeared to be a bundle wrapped in plastic sheeting. Even through the plastic, the shape was unmistakable. A human body. Torres cut through the plastic carefully, documenting everything with photographs. When he pulled back the final layer, everyone in the gymnasium fell silent. Victoria Harris lay on her side, still wearing the burgundy cardigan and white keds sneakers from Sunday afternoon. Her arms were bound behind her back with rope. A strip of duct tape covered her mouth. But it was the injury to the back of her skull that told the story. Blunt force trauma, a single devastating blow. "She was hit from behind," Torres said quietly. "Probably died instantly or close to it. Then the killer bound her, wrapped her, and buried her under fresh concrete." Reeves felt rage rising in his throat. "Time of death?" Based on the condition of the remains and the fact that we know she disappeared Sunday afternoon, I'd estimate death occurred between 2:30 and 5:30 p.m. on October 23rd. The timeline fit. Victoria had entered the school at 2:30. By 5:30 she was dead and buried under the gymnasium floor. The killer had worked fast, breaking in, attacking Victoria, transporting her body to the gym, mixing and pouring concrete, all within 3 hours. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was execution. Professional. Planned. Reeves turned to his team. I want David Cole brought in now, and I want Greg Bradford's whereabouts on Sunday afternoon verified down to the minute. Someone did this, and they're not getting away with it. But even as he spoke, Reeves knew they were missing something. The pieces didn't quite fit. Cole had motive, protecting himself from exposure, but no evidence placing him at the scene. Bradford had motive, revenge for losing his family, but a semi-solid alibi in Los Angeles. And then there was James Harris, who'd seemed genuinely devastated but also had access to the school, knew Victoria's schedule, and might have discovered her secret volunteer work. 3 suspects, 1 victim, and somewhere in the evidence, the truth was waiting to be found. Part 6. The break in the case. The break came from an unexpected source. On Thursday morning, October 27th, Reeves received a call from the Sacramento Records office. A clerk had been processing Victoria Harris's personal effects, items recovered from her classroom desk, when she noticed something unusual in Victoria's day planner. There's a note from October 15th, the clerk said. It says, "Recorded insurance, hidden where Jay won't look. If anything happens, everything is in the house." Everything is in the house. Reeves immediately obtained a second search warrant for the Harris residence. When he arrived at 1247 Riverside Drive with his team, James Harris met them at the door, confused and exhausted. "You already searched the house," James said. "You took her files, her papers, everything." "We're looking for something specific, Mr. Harris. A recording. Did your wife have a tape recorder?" James nodded slowly. "She had a small cassette recorder she used to record herself reading stories for her students. It should be in her office." But the recorder wasn't in the office. Reeves's team searched for 2 hours, checking closets, drawers, under furniture. Nothing. Then Detective Vasquez had an idea. "Everything is in the house," she repeated. "Not in the office. In the house. Where would a woman hide something from her husband?" They started thinking like Victoria. Where would a woman hide something she didn't want her husband to find? Somewhere he'd never look. Somewhere he'd have no reason to go. Vasquez walked into the guest bathroom and stopped. Above the toilet was a decorative cabinet where Victoria stored extra toiletries, tampons, cleaning supplies. "The lady's domain," Vasquez muttered. She opened the cabinet. Behind a box of tampons, wrapped in a washcloth, was the cassette recorder. Reeves pressed play. Victoria Harris's voice filled the bathroom. "My name is Victoria Ann Harris, and I'm recording this on October 15th, 1983. If you're hearing this, something has happened to me. I need you to know the truth about several things." Everyone in the house stopped moving. James Harris pushed past officers to hear his wife's voice. 3 weeks ago, I helped a woman named Michelle Bradford escape from her abusive husband, Greg Bradford. He found out I was involved, I don't know how, but he came to my classroom after school on October 7th. He waited until all the students were gone, then cornered me in the hallway. He said if I didn't tell him where Michelle was, he'd destroy me. He said he had connections, that he could make me lose my teaching license, that he could make sure I never worked again. I told him I would never betray Michelle's trust." Victoria's voice trembled slightly, but she continued. "But that's not the main threat. The real danger comes from someone I thought I could trust. My father's former partner, David Cole. James Harris gasped. I've been investigating my father's old cases. I found evidence that my father, Officer Robert Whitmore, helped abusive husbands cover up the murders of their wives in exchange for money. At least 4 women disappeared after my father responded to domestic violence calls. In each case, the husband was questioned but never charged. In each case, my father's reports were vague, incomplete, or missing key details. On the tape, Victoria took a shaky breath. When I confronted David Cole about this in September, he admitted it. He said he and my father were partners in more ways than one. They ran what he called a service. For the right price, they'd help violent men get rid of their problems permanently, make it look like the women ran away, destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses. Cole said they did it for almost 20 years. Reeves felt his blood run cold. Cole told me if I exposed them, I'd be destroying innocent families, the children and grandchildren of the men they'd helped. He said some of those men had reformed, built good lives, and my accusations would ruin them. I told him I didn't care, that those women deserved justice, even if it was 30 years late. Victoria's voice hardened. Cole said, "Victoria, you're a smart woman. You know how these things work. Sometimes people who dig up the past end up buried in it." That was 2 weeks ago. I told him I was going to the police regardless. That's when he made me an offer. The tape hissed for a moment. He said if I gave him 2 weeks, he'd get me documentation, proof of every case, every payoff, names and dates. He said he'd kept records as insurance against my father, and he'd turn them over to me if I promised to keep him out of it. He'd testify anonymously, he said. Give me everything I needed to expose the scheme without implicating himself. I didn't trust him, Victoria continued, but I agreed to wait. We arranged to meet on October 24th, this coming Sunday, at a neutral location. He's supposed to bring the documents. But if you're hearing this recording, that means the meeting never happened, which means David Cole has done something to prevent me from exposing the truth. Victoria paused. There's one more thing you need to know. Cole has a connection to Greg Bradford. I found a photograph in my father's things, a fishing trip from 1975. My father, Cole, and 3 other men, including a younger Greg Bradford. They knew each other. If Cole wanted me gone, Greg Bradford has both motive and means to help him. Bradford wants revenge for losing his family, and Cole wants to protect his secrets. The tape clicked. Victoria's voice came back, quieter now. If something happens to me, look at David Cole first. He's the one with the most to lose. Check his financial records from the past month. If Greg Bradford paid him, there will be a trail. Cole is smart, but he's also arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable because he was a cop. There was a long silence on the tape. Then Victoria spoke one last time. James, if you're hearing this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I kept secrets from you. I'm sorry I put my mission to help other women above our safety. But I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent. My father was a monster who helped other monsters. I had to try to make it right. I love you. I'm sorry. The tape ended. In the bathroom of 1247 Riverside Drive, nobody spoke for a long moment. James Harris was weeping, his face buried in his hands. Detective Reeves stood with the cassette recorder, his mind racing. Victoria Harris had given them everything: the motive, the suspects, the connection between Cole and Bradford. Pull Cole's financial records, Reeves ordered. Every bank account, every transaction for the past 6 months. And get me Greg Bradford's records, too. If Bradford paid Cole to kill Victoria Harris, we're going to find it. Part 7. The Money Trail, cut to May 2018. Detective Sarah Chen sat in her Sacramento PD office, surrounded by file boxes from the 1983 investigation. She'd listened to Victoria Harris's tape a dozen times, read every witness statement, studied every piece of evidence. The 1983 investigation had focused heavily on David Cole and Greg Bradford. Financial records showed that Cole had deposited $25,000 in cash into his bank account on October 24, 1983, the day after Victoria disappeared. When questioned, Cole claimed it was from the sale of a boat. But investigators could find no record of Cole owning a boat, no bill of sale, nothing to corroborate his story. Greg Bradford's financial records showed a $25,000 cash withdrawal on October 20, 1983, 3 days before Victoria disappeared. The connection was obvious. Bradford had paid Cole to kill Victoria Harris. But there was a problem. Despite the suspicious financial transactions, despite the tape, despite everything, prosecutors in 1983 had decided there wasn't enough evidence to charge either man. The case had gone cold. David Cole had died in 2003 from a heart attack, taking his secrets to the grave. Greg Bradford had gone on to build his real estate empire, never charged, never questioned again. Until now. Chen had one advantage the 1983 investigators didn't have: time and distance. She could look at the evidence with fresh eyes, and she'd found something they'd missed. In the property records for David Cole's estate, Chen discovered that Cole had owned a fishing cabin in the Sierra Nevada mountains from 1972 to 1998. After his death, the cabin had been sold to a private buyer, then later to another family. Chen obtained a warrant to search the current property. When she arrived at the remote cabin with her forensic team, she half expected to find nothing. After all, the cabin had changed hands twice since Cole's death. Any evidence would likely be long gone. But in a shed behind the main cabin, beneath layers of old tools and fishing equipment, they found it. A metal footlocker, padlocked and covered in dust. Inside were documents that proved everything Victoria Harris had suspected. Ledgers showing names, dates, and dollar amounts. Payoff records going back to 1963. Case files for missing women. And at the bottom of the locker, a handwritten journal in David Cole's distinctive scrawl. Chen read it in her car, parked outside the cabin, hands shaking. September 28, 1983. Victoria Whitmore, Harris now, came to see me. Showed me Robert's old files. She knows. Threatened to go to the police. Told her I'd cooperate. Buy myself 2 weeks. Need to handle this quietly. October 7, 1983. Bradford called. Says Victoria Harris helped his wife disappear. Wants her dealt with. I told him my fee. He agreed. This works out perfectly. He gets revenge, I protect the operation, and Victoria becomes another missing woman. Robert would have appreciated the irony. October 23, 1983. Job done. Met Bradford at Lincoln Elementary, 2 p.m. He had school keys, principal's husband, access to everything. We went in through the gym. Asbestos closure gave us perfect cover. Waited in her classroom. Chen's breath caught. Victoria showed up 2:30. So trusting. She thought I was bringing her documents. I told her they were in the gymnasium. She followed me there. Bradford was waiting. He wanted to do it himself, revenge for his wife, but he lost his nerve at the last second. So I handled it. Single blow to the back of the head. She never saw it coming. Bradford helped me mix concrete, poured it ourselves. By 5 p.m. she was buried. Bradford drove back to L.A. for his conference. I drove to San Francisco. Perfect alibis. October 24th, deposited Bradford's payment. $25,000 cash, worth every penny to keep the past buried. Chen closed the journal, her hands trembling with rage. 35 years. Victoria Harris had been right about everything. Cole and her father had run a murder-for-hire scheme for decades. Cole had killed Victoria to protect his secrets, and Greg Bradford had helped him do it. But there was one more entry, dated October 30th, 1983. Police questioned me today. They have Victoria's tape, they have the financials, but they can't prove anything. No witnesses, no forensic evidence, just circumstantial connections. My lawyer says they'll never charge me, and Bradford's already back in L.A. building his empire. We got away with it, but here's the thing. I'm keeping this journal as insurance. If Bradford ever tries to betray me, I'll bury him. Mutual assured destruction. That's how partnerships work. That was Cole's mistake. He'd kept the evidence that would eventually destroy them both. Chen immediately contacted the Orange County District Attorney's office. Greg Bradford was now 72 years old, living in a luxury condo in Newport Beach. On May 15, 2018, Detective Sarah Chen and 4 FBI agents arrived with an arrest warrant. Bradford was eating breakfast on his patio, reading the Wall Street Journal, when they knocked on his door. "Greg Bradford, you're under arrest for the murder of Victoria Harris and conspiracy to commit murder." Part 8. The Trial. The trial of Greg Bradford began on August 6, 2018, in Sacramento County Superior Court. It lasted 3 months and attracted national media attention. The evidence was overwhelming. David Cole's journal, the financial records showing Bradford's $25,000 payment, Victoria's tape recording predicting exactly what would happen, forensic evidence showing Victoria had been killed in the gymnasium where Bradford and Cole had access. The defense argued that the journal was unreliable, the writings of a dead man who couldn't be cross-examined. They claimed the $25,000 withdrawal was for a legitimate business expense, now impossible to verify. They insisted Bradford's brief absence from his L.A. conference was innocent, unrelated to Victoria's death. But the prosecution had one more piece of evidence that sealed Bradford's fate. In David Cole's footlocker, investigators had found a Polaroid photograph dated October 23, 1983. It showed 2 men standing in what appeared to be a gymnasium, concrete mixer visible in the background. Both men wore work clothes splattered with wet concrete. One was clearly David Cole, the other was Greg Bradford. On the back of the photo, in Cole's handwriting, "Partnership sealed, October 23, 1983. It was Cole's insurance policy. Proof that Bradford had been there had helped bury Victoria Harris, and it had sat in that footlocker for 35 years, waiting to be found. Michelle Bradford, now 61 and living under a new name in Montana, testified for the prosecution. She described years of abuse, her desperate escape with help from Haven House, and Victoria Harris's courage in helping her flee. She testified that Victoria had saved her life and the lives of her children. "Greg Bradford was a monster," Michelle said from the witness stand. "He controlled everything, what I wore, who I talked to, where I went. When I finally decided to leave, I knew he'd kill me if he caught me. Victoria Harris gave me hope. She gave me a chance, and he murdered her for it." On November 3, 2018, after 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict. Guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder. Greg Bradford showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Epilogue. Voices that won't be silenced. James Harris attended every day of Bradford's trial. Now, 73 and long retired, he sat in the front row, listening to every detail of how his wife had died. After the verdict, reporters asked him how he felt. "Relieved," he said quietly. "Victoria spent 35 years in that gymnasium. She deserved justice. Now, maybe she can finally rest." He visited Victoria's grave at East Lawn Memorial Park the day after the trial ended. She'd been reburied there in 2018 with a proper headstone. Victoria Ann Harris, 1951, 1983, beloved teacher, silent hero. She gave voice to the voiceless. James knelt beside the grave and placed a brass apple on the headstone, a replica of the keychain that had been found with her car. "I'm sorry I didn't see it," he whispered. "I'm sorry I cared more about professional reputation than your safety. You were trying to save lives, and I was worried about appearances. You deserved better. You deserved protection." He stood slowly, his old knees aching. "But you won in the end, Vic. You got your justice. And Bradford's going to die in prison, right where he belongs." Haven House still operates in Sacramento, now in a larger facility with state funding. They serve over 200 women and children each year. In 2019, the organization was officially renamed the Victoria Harris House for Women and Children in honor of the teacher who'd given her life protecting vulnerable women. Diane Weber, now retired, attended the dedication ceremony. "Victoria believed every woman deserved a chance to escape abuse," Diane said. "She believed in second chances, fresh starts, and the power of speaking truth, even when it was dangerous. This house carries on her mission." Lincoln Elementary School was renovated in 2019. The old gymnasium, where Victoria Harris had been buried for 35 years, was demolished entirely. In its place, they built a new community center with a memorial garden. In the center of the garden stands a bronze statue, a woman kneeling beside a child, helping them tie their shoe. The plaque reads, "Victoria Harris Teacher, Advocate, Hero, 1951, 1983. To teach is to touch lives forever." Every year on October 23rd, Victoria's former students, now adults with children of their own, gather at the memorial. They share stories of Mrs. Harris, the teacher who made each of them feel special, who bought them supplies when they couldn't afford them, who stayed late to help with homework. Tommy Rodriguez, the boy Victoria had bought a winter coat for in 1982, now teaches third grade at Lincoln Elementary. "Mrs. Harris taught me that kindness matters," he said at the 2019 memorial service. "She taught me that one person can make a difference. I became a teacher because of her. I try to be the kind of teacher she was." Detective Sarah Chen attended the memorial service too. She'd spent 6 months of her life bringing Victoria Harris's killer to justice. "Cases like this are why I do this job," Chen told reporters. "Victoria Harris was silenced for 35 years, but her voice was preserved on that tape. She knew she was in danger, and she made sure the truth would come out eventually. She was braver than most cops I know." In a storage room at the Sacramento Police Department, Victoria Harris's cassette tape is preserved in the Cold Case Evidence Archive. Every new detective in the unit listens to it during training. "My name is Victoria Ann Harris, and if you're hearing this, something has happened to me. I want you to know the truth." Her voice, clear, determined, unafraid, reminds them why they do this work, why cold cases matter, why victims deserve justice no matter how long it takes. Victoria Harris vanished from Lincoln Elementary on October 23, 1983. But her voice never did. It echoed through 35 years of silence, preserved on tape, waiting for someone to listen. And when Detective Sarah Chen finally listened, Victoria Harris got the last word. Justice. Delayed, but not denied.